So I got this really interesting book on census records from the 1600s in Jalisco. And you can see this area, it's this area right here. And you can see here, there's like Michoacan, this whole like upper area of Michoacan, that's Zamora. There's Guanajuato there, there's Aguascalientes, but it's this region right here. Actually, this area has been studied a lot. So this is one well-known place in Jalisco, Jalostotitlán, and this is from 1650. This is what the original document looked like, handwritten, and this is what they look like transcribed. If you look, the very beginning of these census records always show indigenous families. See, some of them had last names, some of them didn't. You might see some of your last names here. Now, these folks would have lived in their own towns separate from Spaniards, and they would have owned their land collectively. Many of these indigenous people that lived alongside Spaniards in separate towns in places like Jalisco, Michoacan, and basically all over wherever Spaniards settled in Mexico, these would have been indigenous allies. So these folks here would have been either local indigenous allies or Purépechas or Tlaxcalans. Now, when Spaniards intermarried with indigenous people, it was almost certainly with an indigenous ally, a friendly community. In this period, you had to be indigenous to live in this land. They lived on, essentially, it was like a commune where they, raised their own produce. And I mean, of course, they had to pay taxes to the colonial government, but I mean, they lived segregated from Spaniards. Now, this here is the section where Spaniards and mixed race people lived. So Spaniards and mixed race people owned land as individuals. They did not have collective land ownership, which is very different than the situation with indigenous people. So some of you from Jalisco might see your last names in this section here. Now, some families here you can see did not own slaves. They were intermarried with indigenous people, and so on and so forth. Now, some of these families had very, very large properties, and you can see they even had slaves. And in many cases, if you notice, the slaves don't have the same last name as the people who owned the property, which is very different than the situation in the United States. Most indigenous people and people of African descent didn't take last names probably until after independence, which at that time it would have been, their own discretion, whatever name they chose. Now, the indigenous people that lived on these ranches that were not related to the family, they would have been like campesinos, like landless peasants. That situation actually got worse after Mexico became independent.